Welcome to this conversation on understanding reputation. And honestly, I cannot think of a better person to discuss this with than Charlotte Otter. Just like me, she's an executive communications coach. She's worked and led the executive and employee communications at SAP. She has more than 25 years experience in the area. Her new book is coming out in October. Glad you could make the time. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thanks so much, Michael. It's a real pleasure to be here. And it's always great to hang out with other executive communicators because I think we share specific insights and experiences that I think are relevant for a lot of other people.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very excited about today's conversation. So let's just jump right in. And I would ask you kind of a question about your day today. I mean, if you were to write a headline about your day today, so what would it say?
It would say mysteriously behind the scenes.
Interesting. That makes me curious. Would you be comfortable to tell me more?
Well, you and I had a little bit of mysterious behind the scenes technical things that we had to get through. But really, it's speaking to the process of writing the book. So I'm in the process of writing the first draft. And, the first draft is not what makes it into the final book. But you have to get
Mm.
down that behind the scenes stuff and that mysterious stuff in order to later edit it and hone it and make it beautiful. So that's where I am right now. Doing the behind the scenes
Yeah,
stuff
that
incredibly satisfying to me, but hopefully no one will ever see.
or who knows, maybe it's going to be worth a lot of money at some point if once it's become a bestseller. But it's always interesting. I've had the same experience with my book that how far you can develop a thought that you put down on paper for the first time. And then refine it and tweak it, get other people's feedback, face the harsh truth of how other people read what you thought was so clear, but was totally unclear to them, and then refine it over a couple of periods. Um, and I think that's an important piece for today's conversation, right? To switch that perspective, to look from the other side. So if we would do that for your headline, and if we would imagine that someone else, perhaps even someone who doesn't know you, would read that headline, what do you think? What kind of impression would you think that person will get from you?
Well, I hope they'd get the impression that I'm somebody who is thoughtful and likes to prepare, but they might also get a negative impression that I'm somebody who, maybe is not always in control all the time. So sometimes I'm having struggles. But actually, if I think about how I counsel executives, I think being real is really healthy. I don't think we have to always show up as perfect.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a model of the past where well, not in all companies actually, and not in all countries, I'd say, but well, that the leader has to be that polished and perfect person who's got it all figured out, who's got the answers to everything, but that we can show up as the one who's willing to figure it out, who's willing to push the team and motivate the team to figure it out together, to tap into the brilliance of everyone and admit that, well, we might not be perfect all the time, but we can strive to become better each day. So
Yeah, for sure. And one of my interviewees, who was president in a part of a large software company, she said as much to me. She had nearly 3,000 employees just in her function. And she said it was very important to her to show the messiness of being human, that she was showing up
Mhm.
as herself, and that her staff and team saw that because it gave them the freedom to also show up as themselves. So by demonstrating the messiness behind the scenes, she was actually creating psychological safety.
Yeah, that's very interesting, right? That there's the other side to that. That it first can appear to be, well, making ourselves vulnerable, but it can also make us feel stronger when we don't have to or when we get a chance to step off that hero's pedestal, don't have to impress everyone, but just being helpful, showing up to serve them.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the hero's pedestal, because it speaks to something that I learned about during the MSc in change leadership that I've just completed, which is single loop versus double loop learning. And maybe lots of people know about it, but it was new to me. And single loop learners in corporates are there to fix the problems. You know, how do we fix this problem with this customer? But double loop learners go, we're here to fix this problem with the customer, but tell me, team, what have I contributed to the problem and how can I be better next time? And I think what I'm seeing with my interviews, because I've interviewed specifically diverse leaders and over 40 of them, is really that willingness to be double loop learners. And what it is, you mentioned vulnerability and we talked about perfection, but it's also an incredible strength to say, what was my role in creating this problem and how can I be better next time?
Mhm. You're doing these things for more than 25 years. Have you, if you look back at when you started, will you say that this is a significant change, that you see a change in the way that leaders feel, um, approach that, but probably also feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, there's definitely a shift. There's definitely a shift. There's definitely a comfort with the messiness, with being imperfect, with showing some of the background stuff that goes on. I think that emerging diverse leaders often have had to go through a personal struggle of their own, and that personal struggle almost becomes part of their leadership style. And they wouldn't be who they were without it. They wouldn't be the leaders they were if they hadn't been through that. So it would be not real if they didn't acknowledge the struggle and the process. Whereas I think a certain type of leader from 20 plus years ago was much more interested in image and perfection and showing up in a certain way. So there's a definite change. It's really interesting to observe, and it's really heartening as well, because I'm a parent of 3 kids who are now in their 20s, and to think that they're going to go into a workplace and to be led by leaders like that, I think, well, that will be inspiring for them, and it will make the workplace a much more pleasant place to be.
Mhm. Yeah. So to me, that sounds like, we're now in an age where it's much more easier for a leader to, well, use words that he can believe in because they match like who they actually are, as opposed to, who they perhaps strive to be, or someone else told them that they need to be that way, right?
Yeah, and I think that how they use words, it's really important to you. I know that you're very interested in simplicity of words. But what I'm realizing through my research and backed up by my experience is that the key function of leadership is to give meaning, whether it's to employees, to customers, to partners, to the media, to the general public, to government, to academia. And you have to engage with language and words in order to help people with meaning. And I think what's shaken that up completely has been the advent of social media. I think that before, a leader could safely say anything behind the corporate boundary with no fear that it would leak, or no sense that whatever I say behind the corporate boundary is something that the rest of the world knows about. That security is gone.
Yeah. And I think that brings us right to the heart of the matter, right? Because, as you've pointed out, the leader is one of the core jobs is to give meaning, or as I like to call that, to light the path for the team to where are we headed, why are we headed there, and why it's going to be us that's headed that way. But if we don't really trust in that person, or in that person's truthfulness or authenticity, then getting that unity or aligning that team becomes so much harder, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's why words are only a part of the reputation story. A very critical part is behaviors and consistency of behavior. I was just doing an interview right now with somebody a leader of an advertising agency here in Germany, and he was telling me that he has this reputation for consistency. He's exactly the same no matter who he's talking to. And I was relating to him that often the leaders that I worked with would get bored with consistency because they're A-type personalities. They want to have a new story to tell. And as communicators, we would always advise them, no, stick with the same story, because that consistency of story helps people feel secure, but it also shines back to your reputation that you are a consistent person. You're not suddenly going to go off and do something strange and different. So, behavior is a very important part of reputation, for sure, and how people experience
And
your
that
behavior.
absolutely, and that surprises a lot of people, right? When they think of comms as the department whose responsibility is to craft eloquent messages, right? And then suddenly they speak about how you walk up the stage, or how you stand in front of a camera, or even how you approach um, someone at the trade fair, right? That surprises a lot of people. That all belongs to, well, communications in a wider sense, but certainly to how people perceive you and perceive the congruence of what you say to what you do.
Yeah, the congruence it's such an important word, and it's about, as you say, matching words to behavior, because as soon as there's dissonance, then that affects your authenticity. Then people stop trusting you. Then you can say as many beautiful words as you like, but the trust is then gone.
Yeah,
And sorry, you were saying about comms. I just wanted to reflect that you're so right that people think about comms as like crafting the nice words. It's almost a form of executive coaching. And that
yeah,
in the ideal situation, the head of comms or the executive communicator really builds that relationship of trust so that they can become an executive coach, so that the leader hears the coaching that they receive and starts to adjust how they show up.
yeah. I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I mean, when you take communication seriously, um, and and want to find the words that you truly believe in, so that you can fully stand behind them, it basically automatically leads you to ask the tough questions, right? So why do we do what we do? Why does that matter? Who does that matter for? Um, and so we need to really dig deep, and trust is an important factor here, to trust the person who asks those questions, so much that we open up for them to find words that capture that, right?
Yeah, and that trust isn't a given. And sometimes it's hard for leaders to trust people, which is why I focused my thesis on the question of trust, and that of course is now feeding into the book, but how leaders and communicators build trust so that reputation can be managed, but also protected in times of crisis.
Mm-hmm. Um, could you elaborate a little bit on that? So, what is required there to build or to allow trust to grow?
Yeah, so for my thesis, I did 15 interviews. I interviewed 4 CEO and CCO, Chief Communication Officer pairs, and then another 11 Chief Communications Officers. And what my research showed is that both the CEO and the head of comms have trust building responsibilities, but they're almost completely different. The CEO's trust building responsibilities are around time and space. So you can't advise someone you never see. The CEO has to make sure there's time for comms, not with their chief of staff, with them. Chief of staff can be in the room, but it's got to be with them. There were questions around formal time and informal time, because those have different qualities. Informal time is usually transactional, let's get this done. Formal time is usually strategic. How are we looking for the next 3 months? And then space was about physical proximity and psychological proximity. So I was asking people about whether they operate in the same offices, if they have pop-in or walk-in rights to each other's offices. And if that didn't exist, then how do they build that psychological closeness? Often people aren't co-located anymore. So how do you build the psychological closeness? And those factors are all within the purview of the CEO, because when you work in a hierarchy, the head of comms can ask for time, the head of comms can ask for proximity, but it's up to the CEO to grant that. And if the CEO fulfills most of those factors, they're not all needed, but most of them are needed. The trust building responsibilities of the head of comms is around competence. Can you actually prosecute your job? And character. When the going gets tough, can you advise somebody who's higher than you in the hierarchy and tell them the bad news or the thing that they don't want to hear? And if the CCO consistently does that and the CEO consistently fulfills their responsibilities, then you get into a virtuous cycle. But there's always something to watch out for in the virtuous cycle, which is getting too close. And it's something I observed in my career. When heads of comms or executive communicators get too close to their executive, then bias creeps in, because then they become fond of them. They tell them what they want to hear. So there's the additional factor of always remembering who pays your salary. And it's not the CEO, it's the company. So the heads of comms always have to prioritize the company reputation above the CEO's wishes. That's really, really hard to do. It takes somebody with a lot of character and a lot of strength to be able to do that, because often the rest of the C-suite are going, yes, CEO, it's a brilliant idea. And then head of comms gets shipped into the board meeting and has to go, it's a bad idea, and here's why. Really hard to do.
Yeah, and that's an intricate balance, right? That you just mentioned too. I mean, it's so easy to cross the border boundary to one or the other direction, to get too far away, to distance at times, but then again too close, and that really takes experience, and that's why it's so valuable to have kind of a trusted relationship that forms over time, and that you don't exchange those positions, right? Like each year or so, right?
Exactly. And that's why often, I mean, in the literature around reputation, it says the CEO's reputation is portable. So the CEO takes their reputation from job to job. But interestingly, it's often the head of comms that the CEO takes with them from job to job. I've seen it often in my career.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, one of the things that distinguishes, I think, great advisors from like the not so good advisors is that I mean, everyone in that domain knows how to craft a good speech, how to navigate the usual situations, right? But what really makes great communication great is that you truly believe in what you say. So it's not about that someone writes eloquent words for you, but that someone writes your words, finds a way to articulate your thoughts in your words, and for that to be possible, there needs to be a deeper relationship than just knowing the facts or learning the CV of the executive.
Yeah, and that's why time is so important. Time, because by spending time with someone, you learn their cadences, how they speak, how they express something. You see when they light up, and that's, oh, this is something that is emotional to them and really important to them. So that's something I need to focus on. What I often used to do when I was working with a new executive in corporate, which I would ask to shadow them. So it wouldn't be that they had to focus on me, but I would spend as many days as they would allow me to shadowing them around the business, so I could note, okay, this is how they talk to their immediate leadership team. All right, this is how they talk to customers. This is how they speak to partners. So that when it came to crafting the words, I was using the cadences and the language and the intonations and the phrases that made them them.
Yeah, and this is just one of the most important things I believe that you really feel comfortable with the words that someone else has written for you. I mean, there's that famous example of Michael Bay, who presented on the CES keynote stage for Samsung. I think it was to present their new curved TVs back at the time, and apparently someone wrote the text for him. And basically, apparently the briefing was just, well, you just have to read the teleprompter. But well, he somehow got out of sync and he couldn't wing anything because it wasn't his words, it wasn't his story, and he just totally blew it and had to flee the stage, right? Because, well, he had to use words he didn't believe in about something he didn't believe in, and so he couldn't authentically represent it, and let alone find extensions of that words to improvise on stage.
Yeah, that must have been a really horrible moment for him. Full sympathy.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think he's never done anything like that since, so he's never endorsed another product on
Yeah.
stage since that.
Yeah, and that goes back to the question of time. If you don't spend time with whoever's writing your speech during the process of the speech writing, you're going to get offered something. If lucky, if you've worked with that person for 5 years, if you've given them time in the past, it might be close to your words. But I mean, good comms is really a huge investment on the part of the executive. Can't just outsource it, no matter how smart your executive communicator or your head of comms is. You cannot just outsource it. It is a time investment on the part of the executive or the CEO.
And I think there's even a double meaning to what you just said. I mean, in terms of the department, you need to have that close to you and spend time with them. But you also need to become good at understanding how communication works yourself. Because there's going to be times when you need to on the spot come up with a response without your comms person standing behind you. There's and also the work becomes so much easier when you know how attention works, how tension works, how curiosity works, and how some rhetorical principles work. And so becoming good and mastering communications as an executive makes your life so much easier, towards the public, towards the team, but also in your relation. I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to do everything your own, but it makes working with your comms team so much easier.
Yeah, it really does. And I also think it's the responsibility of the comms team to notice where an executive shines and try to put them into those situations as often as possible, and notice where they don't shine and try to avoid those situations. So I work with one executive who was clear to me he was super uncomfortable in major keynotes, but he had to do them a couple of times a year. So we would make sure he was on stage with a few other people who he could interview or he could allow them to shine. But I noticed where he shone was in rooms of 20. And he just lit up. He came to life. So we tried to focus his communication strategy as much as possible in rooms of 20, because that feeling of empowerment when you stand in front of 20 people or 200, whatever or 2000, whatever your forte is, you shine, you feel good, you get the audience feedback, and then you want to do it again. So it becomes also one of those virtuous cycles. But it takes a sensitive person to notice that and not always try to force executives to do the one thing because that's the thing that worked with another executive.
And it's sometimes hard to see that yourself. I mean, you have a certain impression and you judge from your feelings. You're not everyone is totally honest with you in their feedback, and so it needs an expert at times to point that out to you, that the thing that you excel at might not be the thing that you do the most. But so we should probably shift our strategy a little bit towards where the actual feedback is really good and is serving your reputation, rather than just being okay, or in the worst case even harming it.
Yeah, and I'm starting to see more and more that real comms, really well done, real executive comms is a form of coaching. And it's part of the reason why I'm starting to call myself an executive communications coach, because it's about, as I said, the time and space and about the practice, but it's also about the human. You can't take the human, that individual, unique person, you can't take them out of the equation. You can't just say, good comms is X. Yes, good comms is X, but for person A, and good comms is Y for person B.
Mm.
And it takes a coach or somebody with a coach mentality to notice that and try to ensure that executives are put in the situations that work for them.
And that's only going to become more important, right? As AI becomes more important and as AI takes over more and more of the tedious jobs and the average stuff, to fill your role with your personality so that your team has a real human to attach to and to feel connected to. That's going to be one of the major challenges in the foreseeable future, I'd assume.
Yeah, I think for sure it will be. That one of the things I keep saying is the more digital we become, the more human we have to be.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm seeing that with the kind of the cohort of leaders that I've been interviewing for the book, how incredibly human they are, how they accept their own failures, how they own their messiness, how they're not afraid to show up as how they are. As you point out, that's going to be even more needed in an age where AI is scripting the speech anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you just want to have a polished speech, um, any speechwriter who provides that kind of service will probably only need to know how to write the right prompt, right? But to craft something that brings out the unique personality of that human being, of that CEO, of that CMO, and lets them shine with their strength and their personality. That's a completely different thing. I
It is a
imagine.
different thing, but I would say that most communicators have been practicing that for some time, and are probably, maybe compared to some other functions, better prepared for AI to take over the writing, because a really good communicator, head of comms or executive comms, will be already reflecting the person.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to me it feels like we could go on to have that conversation for the whole day, if not the whole week. So there's just we've just touched the tip of the iceberg. But we don't want to exhaust that. We want to leave some space for the readers to check out your book when it comes out next year, which really deeply explores that field of reputation and how diverse leaders can fill that role. I invite everyone and encourage everyone to connect with Charlotte if you haven't done so already, to learn more about that fascinating field and to be informed when the book comes out. I also invite you to connect with me if you haven't done so already. Check out my new book when it comes out in October. Charlotte, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for sharing so much wisdom with us.
Oh, it's been lovely. Thank you for the kind invite, and good luck with your book when it comes out. And let's make sure to make a date to have the next version of this conversation.
Happy to. See you next time. Goodbye.